we move on to our next speaker, Sethu Saveda Suvanam, the founder and CEO of ReOrbit, a Sweden-based startup in Stockholm, to share his experience as an Indian being a Swedish University alumni, starting his own company in Sweden. The support he has received and some tangible advice on the tips to audience, especially students who would like to hear and inspire to take a similar possible way, and also getting to know the advantages of working with startups. Over to you, Sethu.
So firstly, I would like to thank the NII team for inviting me. So before I go into my reflection on my journey from being a master's student till starting ReOrbit, I'll give a brief introduction on what we do at ReOrbit. So ReOrbit is an early stage space startup where we are building spacecrafts that are modular and reusable. So satellites, they sound very advanced, very complex, but still, if you sort of take a step back and look at satellites in purely machine point of view, it's a big metallic box with some set of electronics with it. And if you have to compare satellites with any sort of computers, you could actually draw a parallel from mainframe computers of 1960, where things are very discrete, things are not connected. So in that sense, satellites are still sort of very old school in that sense. So what basically happens is that since you have cluster of satellites operating in tandem today's world to enable any of these digital applications, you need to have these data flows or connectivity within satellites. You could imagine computers today, you cannot imagine computers today without internet. But satellites up, they are not actually connected, meaning there's no data flow within satellites. So that puts quite a lot of efforts on operating satellites. So that's a big problem. And also, secondly, given that things are done pretty much in old school, meaning that you build a satellite for a particular functionality. So people tend to push quite a lot of functionality into one satellite and then launch it up, and then just keep your fingers crossed that all these functionalities that you push in, magically works in space. But now that people are aspiring to go to Moon, Mars, start mining asteroids, this functional way of building satellites wouldn't work. So you have to sort of think in a different way, and that's what ReOrbit is enabling, making satellites much more agile, much more connected, much more autonomous, and also enabling satellites to be reconfigurable in orbit. So yeah, that's a brief overview of what we do. Coming back to the topic today, some tips or some tangible advices on my journey. So I before I was thinking what to talk, I was just thinking about how my sort of journey has transpired from being a master's student 11 years ago at KTH all the way till today, starting ReOrbit. Then I really found there were 6 important sort of aspects that has made me take this journey, and at each of these critical point I've actually learned a certain valuable point, which I think can be quite useful. So I'd like to sort of share my journey of this 11 years. So originally from India, as you would have seen and known from my name. So I've spent 21 years in India. I did my bachelor's in electrical engineering, and then I was quite passionate about doing research, and I was also always passionate about space. But given that India didn't, at least then in 2006, was not quite open in terms of space, so although I was quite passionate about space, I didn't really know how to get into or get this foothold into space. So I ended up taking electronics, and I completed my bachelor's. I came to KTH to do my master's in nanoelectronics because I was quite inspired with miniaturization of things. Then about, let's say, 6 months down the line when I started doing my master's, what happened was there was a big group in KTH who got extremely big funding. So they got 2 big funds from SSF and Wallenberry. And the project was to build whole avionics for sending a satellite for Venus. And then the group at KTH was hiring, I think, close to 10 to 11 PhDs at that time. I was quite excited because, I never knew how to get into space. And here was an opportunity where I could just get into space from nowhere. And 3 of the professors who were hiring were actually my teachers as well. So they were teaching me then. And that's where I sort of learned my first lesson, that when I was thinking to approach them, but then I was also taken back because I was just 6 months down the line, and then they were hiring for PhDs who were who basically have completed the masters, who had their work experience. Like, should I go and ask them, or will they laugh at us? But then I said, okay, why not? Just let's go and ask them. So if you want something, I think you have to dare to ask, and asking always helps. So I just went, knocked their door, and say, hey, you know what? I'm quite interested. Do you think there's an opportunity for me? And they were actually quite surprised, because it was just 5 months since I started my master's, and I had like almost 1.5 years to complete my master's. Then they said, yeah, you can actually, because you seem, I had pretty good grades, I had pretty good experience where they wanted. So they said, okay, I think there's 6 months time that you could complete your master's, meaning that I have to complete my master's in like 1 year since I started. And if you could do that, then I think you will have a chance to take. So I did actually give that a try. So I actually completed my master's, say, in October next year. So it's been like about 11-12 months since I started. And then eventually they hired me as a PhD. And then I spent like 5 years really doing some of the fundamental works on developing avionics for silicon carbide, Venus exploration. So when I completed my PhD, I was getting quite a lot of offers in space, but then I was also at a point where I could try new things, because if you are doing, like, say, a postdoc, which I was planning to do, you actually have an opportunity to try new things being a postdoc. So and I was sort of quite interested with that thought, like trying something completely new so that I could start expanding my horizon. And that was like the second lesson I learned, that trying new things is always a good thing. So I did try, and I got a couple of offers in different sort of completely different fields, and one field that was quite interesting for me was solar cells. So there was a big group at Uppsala University who was looking to establish some processes for their solar cell manufacturing, and they hired me. So I spent like first 1 year trying to optimize their processes. Then what I realized after 1 year was that taking deeper dive into these materials, I found pretty similar characteristics of these solar cell materials to the materials I was working for space during my PhD. And then I could straight away start connecting these dots, that probably these materials could also be quite interesting for space. And then I sort of applied for certain fundings where I got this money, and then I started testing these materials, solar cell materials, primarily focused for terrestrial applications, but for space. And eventually got, I think we got like the best solar cell material for space then that was published. And that's where I think the third lesson is that, you have to always carry back your experiences and try to always sort of connect the dots when you're trying new things. So you have to be open to try new things, but also you have to always connect back to your past experiences. So that would sort of really give you a big picture of trying new things and different things. And then, as I said, we got like pretty good results on this. And then I thought, okay, probably we could start commercializing this. And then I spoke with Uppsala Innovation. I think Dhoni forgot to mention, Uppsala also has their own innovation hub. And then they eventually took me in to their program, where we started looking at commercializing these materials. And I got a great support there. But 6 months down the line, what I really felt was that within space, if you have to start commercializing, you have to have contacts. I mean, space is a very small fraternity that you have to know people to start really making sense out of starting a space business. So then I thought, okay, probably all my life I've been in academics. I have to start, looking for some industrial position for 1 year. And then eventually I was hired by one big space company in Sweden as a sales manager. And that was quite a good eye opener for me, because I started really seeing things that were on academics in a completely different perspective. Because when you start selling things, there are quite a lot of things that would come you wouldn't never thought when you're doing research, like what is the value the customers are getting, what sort of end effects you're bringing in. And that sort of opened up quite a lot for me in terms of really making a product that's not quite fantastic, but that's actually useful. And then I think about 1 year after I started my sales job, what I started seeing was that there's a bigger problem in space, where space still being like pretty advanced, pretty high tech. The ways things are built today and the way things were built in 60s, if you actually take the manual book of 60s and 2020 and compare the way satellites are built, they're like exactly similar, meaning that the processes have never been improved in space. And that sort of triggered me, and that sort of fascinated me, like it has to be different. Why isn't it different? And then when I started going deeper into these issues, then that sort of opened up a Pandora box of new things for me, where there was a very clear evidence that market needs these new things, a new way of building space, but then no one is daring to take the steps because space is super old school, that you cannot change this. That's the mindset that space has. And then I was at a junction where I have to take a call, like, should I take this risk of just changing the mindset of this industry? Because if the thing that we are doing is really completely changing the mindset of what people are thinking in space. And then said, okay, I have to take this step because I truly believed in it. And that's where, like, my fifth lesson was that, if you believe in something, you have to just take that step. If you're fighting against an industry, if you're fighting against anything, you have to believe in your beliefs and not dare to take that step. And then when I took the step, then there was another partner who was eventually coming to join with me. I resigned my job. I quit my job. I think after 2 months, he just backed out. He said, hey, no, this is not my cup of tea. I'm not going to come. And then it was me just left alone, resigning my job, trying to do things. And that guy was like the technical guy. So it's even harder, being a space company when your tech guy just drops off. And that's where I think the most important lesson I learned is that in a startup, failure is also an option. I mean, failure is the best option, actually, I would say, in a startup. So what then that triggered was like, okay, I started looking out for another tech guy. And eventually I then partnered, or I came in contact with a person called Ignacio, who was the CTO of like the fastest growing space company today, and is one of the space company that's expected to be a unicorn soon. So I got in contact with him, and then we had pretty similar thoughts, and then he just said, okay, I'm just resigning my job. I'm going to join you. So I eventually got Ignacio, and then I think two months down the line, I also got a pretty senior guy from Airbus. I connected with him, and he was like, I'll join you. So things sort of start happening. So in that sense, I think in a startup, failures are good things, I would say, and failure is also an option when you're in a startup, and you have to start embracing failures. And finally, I would say, like, one of the key things that at least I learned being in startup is that you have to have proactive patience, meaning that things go very slow. So you have to have patience, but also you have to be proactive, because when things go slow, you start sort of losing track of certain things. So you have to also be proactive in that sense. So proactive patience is also quite critical, I would say. Yeah. So these are some of the learnings that I had, at least through my journey of just being a master student all the way starting ReOrbit and expanding ReOrbit. I'll be happy to take questions if there's time, but as Tony said, I think LinkedIn is the best forum. But just always reach out to me if there's anything else.
Yeah, thank you, Sethu. That was actually inspiring, and I think now it has given hope to the international students and entrepreneurs who would like to do their best in their career. Yeah, so you have quite a few questions. Yeah, how important is for entrepreneur to manage time, and how do you do that?
Yeah. Time management is definitely quite critical. I would say how to do that, at least for me, the two things. I think one is focus, another is like keeping things simple. I always try to keep things simple, even if it's quite complex. I tend to keep it simple. I always compare two things. So research, startups, and cooking are very similar. The more complex you make, the worse it gets. So if you keep everything simple, I think that gets quite easy. So I mean, yeah, I would really draw parallels from cooking. So keep things simple, you get a good dish. Keep things simple, I think you get a good startup. Keep things simple, you get a good research.
Yeah, that's the right way. Yeah, and one more question. If you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice earlier in your career, what would that be?
What would that be? That's a good question. I haven't thought about it, actually. Maybe I think, I don't know, probably I should have spent a bit more time on my industrial career, but that's the only thing I would have done a bit. But I guess, at least for me, the way it turned out, things really fell in place. I guess I definitely say that at least within the area that I'm working, connections are like the thing. I mean, I'm sure any startup, you need to have contacts. I mean, contacts are the things. So the more time you spend building your contacts, I think the more faster you can get your objectives.
Yes. And how does COVID pandemic affecting entrepreneurs, and how it affected you in case?
In that sense, I mean, initially I said, like, the guys who were about to start with me, they just dropped out. I think I got this. I know we had this conversation in March where it was just the COVID was just coming up. So I thought it would really end up quite bad, but actually it ended up quite good for me, because one, I see that at least the investment scenario is changing quite a bit because of COVID. Particularly, I think there are quite a lot of VC firms who are looking at more strategic investments because of COVID. And given that we are, I mean, our segment would come into a more strategic segment. We are really seeing quite a lot of investment, positivity from the investment sector. But also, I would say, like, on the other hand, the market is also quite open in terms of hiring best guys today. I mean, because of COVID, there are people who are willing to try new things. There are people who are also available in market, which otherwise wouldn't have been possible. So in that sense, at least for me, things have turned out in the best possible way. But I know there are certain other segments where things have fallen down. But I could speak for my sector at least.
Yeah. We have got one question from Yadav. I read that ReOrbit is headquartered in Helsinki. If correct, why did you choose to move from Finland to Sweden?
So I did the other way around. Actually, I made my move from Sweden to Finland. So I would put it this way. I mean, this is purely focused on space. So I'm not generalizing things. So at least for space, Finland is a much more dynamic, has much more dynamic environment. One, and two, also it has a very strong governmental support as compared to where we initially established. In Sweden. So that those were the two sort of key triggers for us to go outside Sweden.
Yeah. When approaching an industry which is very old school, I would imagine that the innovative aspects of progression are very important. Yes. Did you draw any inspiration from other industries?
Yes, of course. I mean, one thing, I mean, for me, I would say, like, the core aspect is the culture, the company's culture, or I would even put it this way, like, habits that you sort of incultivate in your company. And we have drawn quite a lot from definitely the software industry. I mean, for instance, what we really say within ReOrbit is that, anyone shouldn't be scared of bringing the most craziest idea. And if someone brings the most craziest idea, you should not just say, like, hey, this is crazy, but you have to at least put some time to brainstorm around, is it physically possible to do these things? And okay, you could put this in, like, quite different ways. But I mean, if you look at, like, Google, Apple, I guess they follow the same thing, like putting innovation to the core. And that's I think standardized across industries. And we definitely sort of take inspirations from these success stories.
Yeah. That's were the questions for you. And thank you, Sethu, for joining us today. Now let's